Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of In Conversation Live from the Royal Society of Medicine. Roger Kirby, our president, likes to refer to it as the desert island discs without the music. So he really expects us to make it interesting, rhythmical, and musical through words. Well, I know we can most certainly do that tonight, as we have a very special guest, Melanie Reid MBE, who is eloquent with her words. She is a journalist, a writer, a storyteller, disability advocate, and most importantly, a patient. As most of those in the medical profession will agree, the patients are the center of our care and the most important person. Melanie has used her unique voice to write the Spinal Column in The Times, which is an eye-opening and award-winning account of her life. Welcome, Melanie. We are grateful for you joining us this evening.
Hello, Afsana. It's lovely to be here. I'm really honoured to be asked to join you all.
Thank you. And shall we firstly, Melanie, this evening, start with life growing up? And you were born in London, I believe.
I was born in London in 1957, and my parents had been through the war, and I was a very late baby, and I have very austere, quite Edwardian parents, and I was very tall and tomboyish, and we had no TV. No TV till I was 16, so very deprived in that sense. And we moved to Lancashire with my father's job when I was quite young, and I went to school in Lancashire, and I was sporty and outdoorsy, and I had a happy childhood, and I was lucky.
Yes, and then that sort of the way you lived your life, happy-go-lucky, sort of carried on in through to your adult life, and you carried on. And can we carry on with that, of how life progressed and how you chose journalism? And
I was sporty. I did English at university because it was the thing I was good at school, and it was very much a cop out, and I fell into journalism by accident. I was extremely lucky. I would never get in now, but managed to do so then, and it was it was writing, it was fun, and I was very shy, I think, but I sort of learned how to I was always quite empathetic, and I managed to talk to people, and did okay. And I went up through, progressed, was promoted, and was part of editing teams on Scottish national newspapers. And then I joined The Times in 2007. I was writing for the London edition. I was doing comment pieces for the London edition, and for the Scottish edition, I was, doing daily journalism, editing, feature writing, news reporting, and I was also a mother. And I think, like all working mothers, I thought I was superwoman. I was a sort of mistress of my universe, and very hash bash, and strong and fit, and there was never enough hours in the day.
Yeah, and I like that phrasing, because even your son called you a super mother, and you're a superwoman going and doing things. And really, this was so. If we look as a way, because you had a huge catastrophic accident, really, that changed your life. But if we look immediately pre-accident, you were very active, very sporty, and you enjoyed horse riding.
Yeah, I was in my when I had my accident, I was 52. So, but I kidded myself that I was in my 30s. I was pretty fit. I ran a lot. I did 10Ks. I kept fit, and I rode, and I mucked out horses, and I was on the go all the time. And you feel untouchable. And when life does jump out and attack you, it really is like running into a brick wall. So it was an enormous shock. I in my own little world, I did think I was a bit of a superwoman.
Mm. And at that point, your journalism, what were you writing at that time, pre-accident? What sort of articles were you writing?
I was doing comment pieces for the London edition of the Times, and I was doing news reporting in Scotland. So, you know, everything and nothing, feature writing. When you're a small team covering a whole country, you travel a lot. You have to be in the office, you know, 8:30 in the morning on top of the news schedule. And, you know, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning and on the go. And yeah, you don't, probably pretty complacent. And I hope I wasn't arrogant, but I didn't have time to dwell or analyze too much on anything. I just lived life.
Mm-hmm. And then I know you mentioned you had an accident, so you were out on horse riding like you would have done on many other days before, and there was a small jump, and you would have liked to have taken the jump. Normally you would have taken the jump in your sort of normal stride, but on that day the horse decided not to jump. So
yeah, I was aspiring to participate at the very bottom end of eventing, which is the sort of professional end of the sport. And I was playing, you know, I was an experienced rider. I'd had horses for 30 years. I'd done lots of exams and qualifications. I was by no means a novice. I was experienced, but bad luck happens to everybody. And my horse on the day was on a training course, and my horse on the day decided to stop at a jump, a practice jump. And because I'd thrown my heart into it, and I kept going, and I made the fatal mistake of trying to, probably out of pride, I made the fatal mistake of trying to hang on, and I sort of tried to, you know, hold on to his neck. And as a result, as I went, my arms were behind me, so I kind of went over the jump, and I landed on the ground at the other side. I landed on my face, and my legs, my body just kept on going, and I flipped over. And I felt the impact on my face, and all I saw in my head was just this, everything went red, and I felt this amazing, beautiful warmth all over my body. And it was probably as close as you could get to your own little nuclear explosion, I guess, because that's what it was. It was my spinal cord was, you know, it wasn't broken, but it was stretched on one side and compressed on the other at C6-7. So it was a neck injury. And
yeah, and I know we've talked about this before, Melanie, but and at the time, what was going through your head, your mind, and during that accident, and I know you've spoken through it quite eloquently with me of what happened and what was going through your mind, and the people you interacted with as well during that journey.
At the point of the accident, you mean?
Yes,
Well, I was aware. I managed to put my hand down, and I could feel that I could feel my jodhpurs, could feel my breeches, but my leg couldn't feel my hand. And I said to them, I can't feel my legs. And you better get, you know, get an ambulance. And then I thought, I was lying there thinking about it, and then I thought, no, I think you better get a helicopter. And so they phoned for a helicopter, and yeah, it was in the days of the Sea Kings. It was 2010. It's still, so I got to go in a Sea King, a naval Sea King, which had always been a dream, but it wasn't quite the way I'd hoped it would be, sadly. Yeah.
And that's one of the things. It's the things that stay in your mind and the detail of that particular day. And obviously, once you got into the hospital after the accident, that you have almost two elements of healing. You have the physical element of healing, and then there's a psychological element. So if we go through that journey, and I know you discussed this in the book you've written, because you've written that lovely book, but if we go through that physical aspects of healing first, and what your impression was like as a patient, and, you know, living that experience.
Well, I think it's a profound shock. You know, we all of us expect to live to an old age and not to suffer terrible accidents or dreadful things. That's that's a human assumption. And when suddenly you are utterly helpless in an emergency room, you're in resus, you're in MRI scanners, and there is this intense novelty value. I mean, I'm a journalist. I was conscious enough to be aware that what was happening was extraordinary. And I remember thinking when I was in the MRI scanner, thinking, who knew? You know, who knew it was like this? I'm going to have to write about this. And I genuinely felt in the early days when I mean, I was stuffed full of morphine and all the rest of it, but I had this urge to try and remember everything, because I genuinely wanted to communicate the strangeness and the shock of it all. And that became, I felt like, I felt like a war correspondent in the trenches. You know, it was almost like I was a war correspondent, and the front line was my own ruined body. And I kind of, when I started, I dictated in the beginning. I couldn't, my hands they didn't work properly. They still don't work properly, but I could do so little in the beginning. But I dictated the first few columns into a dictaphone that my colleagues transcribed. And that, but it was that start of that need to express the weirdness and it's like being on another planet, being in a spinal unit. I mean,
yeah.
I know that you personally have had experience of this too, and you know that spinal units are a place where there's nowhere else like them. You know, there's nowhere that replicates the shock and the trauma and the things we all have to come to terms with.
Yeah, so that's one element, was the sort of physical element, sort of having the operations and pushing together, but there's also that element of the psychological aspect of healing that happens in a spinal injuries unit or on the patient's journey, wherever it may be. And I know we've discussed sort of your experiences and what you thought of seeing other patients there, and thoughts in your mind and what people would say to you as well.
I think it's, in a way, if you ever feel sorry for yourself, you should go to a spinal unit, because all you have to do is look around and there is always somebody who's worse off than you are. You think, hey, what's happened to me is catastrophic. And then you see the person in the bed over there and you think, nah, what happened to them is catastrophic. I'm actually really quite lucky, because I've got a right hand and I can still tap on a computer keyboard. They're devastating stuff. I think the journey from when you become disabled in a matter of seconds, I think it's an enormous thing to get over psychologically, and the process takes years, absolutely years, and you're only just beginning when you're in a spinal unit. And I think a lot of my early time, years and years, was spent in denial. Probably, I mean, after 13 years, I'm probably getting a bit better at it now. But I certainly, when I was in the spinal unit, I was in denial. I got my therapy by being in denial, defying the doctors, and I got it by writing stuff down, and I would hit send on my laptop and it would go into the ether. It took me years to reread it, because it was far too upsetting to reread it. It was kind of almost like I exorcised some of the grief and I was able to expel it a little bit, and that helped me cope. And I was arrogant enough to think, right, I'm going to beat this. I'm going to do physio, and I'm going to, you know, things could be worse. So I'm going to, for the sake of my family and the people I love, I'm going to work damn hard in the spinal gym and make it work. I think all of us probably with spinal injuries suffer to some degree or another or from post-traumatic stress disorder. I was resistant to the idea for a while, but I think I've grown up enough now to accept that and accept how sort of in some ways damaged and wounded I am, and how grief still jumps out and attacks me a lot still. Yeah, I have to learn to cope with that.
I think that's part of the thing, isn't it? That the question is, do you ever fully get healed when you've gone through something like this that's been so life-changing in all aspects of the term? Because like you said, you were quite tall, and just the height difference itself.
There is there's something really massive when you end up in a wheelchair, and that is the loss of your identity, because the person you used to be doesn't exist anymore. That's the biggest thing to come to terms with. This strong, capable, can-do person, she's gone. You are forever on wheels in supplication, needing help. You begin 60-70% of your sentences begin, could you pass me, would you, oh please, would you do that for me, could you, you are, and you're always looking up, because normal people are still up there. And I was over 6 foot, so I was very tall and very strong, and I could look men in the eye, and that was a great advantage in life. I had the kind of it gave me a confidence and a presence that I wasn't really aware of until I lost it. And then you feel completely insignificant when you're down at sort of waist level. And that sense of finding out who you are again, this new person on wheels. I confess, I still meet people to this day, new people, and I want to tap my breastbone and say, you don't really know me. The real me's in here. I wish you could see the old me, but you can't. What you see is me, this sort of passive, very this spectator in life, and that's really hard to get used to, but one does.
Well, the thing is, you've made you say you're a spectator, but you actually are giving the world a glimpse of your life, and that's a very powerful thing, Melanie. A lot of people, they have none of that insight, and I personally think you're very brave to do that. A lot of people just can't put it so eloquently the way that you do, and it's interesting because we always talk about good communication, that personalized and is important and vital to the sense of respect and dignity for our colleagues, our patients, and the healing process. And we always talk about this in our professional sort of arenas. So the $1 billion question really for you is, what sticks in your mind, for better or not so good maybe, of what helped you the most through that journey?
Well, the spinal units, as you know, do not deal in false hope. They can't. So my consultant, the wonderful Dr Purcell, I remember her saying to me, through the morphine, I remember her saying to me very early doors, you're going to be in a wheelchair, because I was Asia A at that time. I later got as far as Asia C, almost Asia D. But at that point, there was nothing. And she said, you're going to be in a wheelchair. And I took that as a challenge, because it was kind of the only way I could survive. Does that make sense to you? It was kind of like, this is so grim, this is so awful, I'm just going to have to fight this, and it'll give me something to do, struggling and fighting it. And so that was obviously a dark day, but I used to go around and I would I would sort of pick up little nuggets of hope. I would talk to people who were incomplete, people who were further forward in the spinal, who were nurses, or people who were further forward in the spinal journey than me. And they might say something that I would latch onto and think, well, maybe I could do that. I'm going to try and do that. I want to use that machine. And my physiotherapist, who was wonderfully, against false hope, she said, no, you'll never use that machine. You'll never use a leg bike. And I did. It was like a challenge. My legs are going to start working again enough. And they did enough that a leg bike became functional for me. So my communication there was no empathy in that sense. There was no one sort of saying this is terrible. Spinal units are quite tough places because there's a lot of black humor. There's always someone in a dreadful situation, far worse than you, as I've said. And it's up to you to use the opportunity and do what you can. And so nobody kind of, apart from the wonderful nurses that when they found you crying, they'd let you sort of wet their uniforms, sort of slobbering on their shoulders. They were, in private, they were wonderful. But there's a lot of tough love in spinal units. And I respect that. I would like to say, though, that my message, I think, is that there's never not any hope, because it was Henry Marsh, the retired neurologist, who wrote that without hope, medicine is nothing. And I really believe that, be it with a spinal injury or be it with cancer, there's always hope, and there's always that sense that good things will still be there. You're going to wake up tomorrow morning, hopefully, and there will be things that make it worthwhile. And there might be improvement, there might not, but you're still going to be here. The people you love will still be here.
I think that's so important. It's that the way you've taken the journey, that pivotal role of positivity and how you've addressed every situation. And we could just hear that in your voice today when you're talking about the physiotherapist telling you, you can't use that. And you said, I will use that. And you used it. It's a small, little sort of goals or aims, and you achieve them and you think, right, I can do the next one. And I think you've been very unique in having that pivotal role of positivity to drive your identity really forward. And that comes across in the writing. When we were talking before, we were discussing when you were actually postoperatively after the breast cancer treatment, you were on the intensive care, and you met someone there.
Well, because out of caution, because of all my comorbidities, I hate that expression, comorbidities. That's my, please doctors, do not use the word comorbidities when you talk to disabled people. It's horrible. Think of another way of putting it. But I was sent to high dependency for the night, and I spent the night, and I was fine. I mean, I was lying there, and I was wired up to everything. Everything's beeping and burring, and I've got drips and everything. And I was completely healthy, and all the stats and everything were brilliant. I felt a complete fraud because I was taking up a bed, and there was nothing wrong with me. But the lovely thing was that the nurse on the shift was the same nurse who had looked after me in the same high dependency the night after my accident. And I remembered her because I had just been lying there, in a complete, in horror, sort of horror and shock. And I remember this person, I was conscious of this presence beside me, wetting my lips during the night. And when I left high dependency after my accident, I remembered them saying, and this was through loads of morphine, I remembered the nurses saying, come back and see us when you're better.
Yes.
And I took that nugget with me. This is the power of nurses, power of the language nurses use. I took that nugget with me and I nurtured it, and I wrote about her, and someone had shown her the article, and in fact I think I wrote about her in my book. And blow me, but she was in charge of the ward when I was there after my mastectomy. And she came up and it was lovely. We had a great hug and we had a great chat, and she told me all about her. You know, she got a little boy, and she said, "Can you believe they leave me in charge of this place now?" And you know, it was just brilliant. I mean, my cancer care was superb. Superb.
It's interesting, isn't it, how somebody who's caring for you when you're so critically ill almost is a long lost friend that you go back to and you get to talk to, because it's a shared personal part of your journey that nobody else will share with you.
She remembered me because I was covered in mud, because I'd landed on my face on the downside of a jump. So I was covered in mud, and she said I was just lying there. She said, "I could tell you were in absolute misery, and I felt so sorry for you." But it's that sort of the serendipity of life that we make contact again. And you know, these things are precious, these connections. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is, as professionals, we don't necessarily realize what's important or isn't important, but like you said, that little nugget of comment that you could hold on to, and that hope and that positivity. As you know, here at the Royal Society of Medicine, we have great colleagues over many years, and because the RSM has existed for many years, I've informed change in services for the delivery of care for the benefit of patients, because our work is really about you as the patient. You're the center of our universe. We only exist because patients are there. So for one night only, if I asked you if you had one wish of how things could be different, what would it be and why?
Okay, it's bladder care. And it is, I would like bladder care to be prioritized and built in to the whole strategic structure. Instead of being the tail end Charlie, I would like bladder care to be revolutionized and to be put right up as at the heart of planning, NHS planning and funding. My dream is that we could have devices. I mean, we have devices that we have implants for our ears, our eyes, our hearts, probably lots of other things I don't know about. Why has no one had the chance or the backing to develop some sort of electronic device to control a urethra that doesn't work anymore? Because the amount of time and money and precious NHS funding that goes on incontinence, on hospital-acquired UTIs, on home-acquired UTIs, on the misery it inflicts on people. And it's the absolute Cinderella medicine. I'm sure other people will say they're Cinderellas too. But for those of us that have paralyzed bladders, I'm horrified at how primitive and under-resourced bladder care has been. And that would be, fairy godmother, please make that happen. That we get, there are researchers out there who are, inventing new types of catheter, who are inventing, antibiotics direct to the bladder devices, who are really, really trying to revolutionize it. But at the moment we're still using catheters, indwelling catheters that were designed 100 years ago. I mean, it's ridiculous in terms of, sending rockets to Mars and things. Smartphones with bendy screens, and yet we're still using sort of medieval technology to keep people dry. And an awful lot of us are going to end up with incontinence problems, because even if disability doesn't get you, then old age often will. So I think we've got to drop the taboo. We've got to drop the fact that bladder care is always outsourced to nurses. Oh, it's doctors don't really want to know. It's a problem it's a problem. Let the nurses deal with incontinence, catheter blockages, everything. I really think it has to be put right back up the priority tree and built into the structure, the strategies. That is my wish, Afsana.
Okay, so there you are in the audience. I must say, Melanie has thrown the gauntlet down and she's dropped it. And to all the healthcare professionals out there, the policymakers, to the urologists that deal with these things, please do pick up the gauntlet and let us see what we can do together. And obviously, we've opened this up because the RSM is a centre for bringing people together, and that includes patients. And wouldn't it be lovely to have patient-centred care where the patient has asked for something and we can put it together? So I put it out to you. Remember, if you can do something, you definitely will have one columnist out there that will be writing about the progress, and she sits in front of you. And I think that is a wonderful thing to be able to do. Well, Melanie, I have to thank you for spending this evening talking to me and allowing an audience to witness what we've just shared. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Melanie, I would like to thank you so much on behalf of the Royal Society of Medicine, the members and listeners for your precious time this evening. And I know Professor Roger Kirby is the one that originally contacted you and wanted you to come. And I think he did an amazing thing to have the patient's voice here. Thank you so much, Melanie, for this evening. Absolute pleasure to talk to you this evening.
Thank you for having me.